Who are the top stars in the South Florida sports landscape? On today's show, we are going to rank them 10 to 1, their impact on the sporting community, and which Panthers made it into the top 10.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into Sunday, July 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And just a reminder for some housekeeping, once again, throughout the month of August, we will be having somewhere between 2 to 4 shows a week. We'll be ramping it back up to 5 days a week starting in mid to late September. So this is once again an opportunity to get creative throughout the summer when there is not much news lately in the world of the Florida Panthers, even though there's big NHL news going on with the trade of Erik Karlsson to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But on today's show, we are going to rank the top athletes in South Florida sports. And who better to talk about this with than someone who is well versed in the South Florida sports landscape. He is Florida Panthers historian and Marlins historian, Francisco Oporta. Francisco, welcome back to the show.
I'm at least semi well versed in 2 of the 4 franchise, and I guess the soccer team too now because now they matter.
Yeah, and this list include everyone from the 4 major sports, as in MLB, NHL, NFL, NBA, and then we're gonna include someone from the MLS team. If you know, a little bit of a hint there, but this was something that was spoken about on the Locked On Heat show with David Ramil and Wes Goldberg. I decided to message them, saying, "Hey, do you think that I could also do this, but my version of it?" And they said, "Go ahead." So you'll see, if for the listeners who listen to multiple Locked On shows in South Florida, you'll get the Florida Panthers host our top 10 along with my special guests. But let's start with 10 to 8 on who are top 10 players in South Florida sports. And I'm going to start with Luis Ariz at number 10.
Okay.
And you know, I think the only issue would be the slugging for Luis Ariz. Can hit in different situations to every part of the field, and when there's runners in scoring position, and he always gives the team a chance to when you get on base, and his fielding percentage is actually pretty good. That's something that's not talked about, but definitely a guy who gives his team a chance to win. And then number 9, I'm gonna have wide receiver 2 for the Miami Dolphins, Jalen Waddle, a homegrown kid that the Dolphins drafted with the Texans pick that they traded back to number 6 for, and he's been the great wide receiver number 2 for the Dolphins. And then number 8 is Bam Adebayo for me. Guy who could run the offense, take the ball up the court as well for a big guy. Doesn't really post up. That's not his game, but definitely can shoot valuable mid-range jumpers around the perimeter as well. So 10, Luis Ariz. Number 9, Jalen Waddle. Number 8, Bam Adebayo for me, Francisco. How about you?
Okay. And I guess I feel like we're going to have very similar lists because, I mean, there's a lot of athletes in South Florida, but there's not, like, if you're trying to compile a top 10, there's a few criteria that you're thinking of with regards to their performance on the field. I actually take into account some of their stuff off the field a little bit because I think as an athlete, you're also kind of seen as a role model. You're also seen in the community. You're also seen just how you make fans feel, right? I mean, I do. You'll see my bias with regards to like the Marlins and even the Panthers a little bit here, but I think that there's certain players that evoke certain emotions out of fans. I recently did a for whatever reason, for like a day or even for like a few days during a week, this I mean, before the Marlins really hit this skid, which has been really bad. I just talked about Reniel Pinto, and if you're a Marlins fan, that evokes some emotions from you because a lot of emotions of anger. I posted a picture of this guy, and people responded with, "This guy ruined my childhood." He was a Marlins lifer, and there's just certain players that give you this sense of, oh man, he's beloved, like Dontrell Willis, or you know,
the leg kick.
The pinnacle is like Dan Marino and Dwayne Wade, right? Those are the two. And then you have guys like Reniel Pinto or Heath Bell, or just you know, Todd Bertuzzi played like 7 games. You know, there's like, oh, we traded Luongo for this guy. So it's there's some guys there's just ire from people. So I think there is some of that criteria. So I wanted to explain a little bit of my criteria before I started talking about this. But I would say I need a defensive player for the Miami Dolphins, or not a defensive player, but a guy that, you know, we need one of the big boys in there. So I put Christian Wilkins in there.
Okay.
Right? So Christian Wilkins, he's done fantastic. So the team has drafted him. He's an interesting mind off the field. He's very compared to other NFL players who just seemed, I don't know, there's just a certain cut of cloth from them. He's very unique in that sense. He's like, I love musicals and things like that. He's a very a very unique personality that I like about him. He'll do stuff for the team with regards to like sending him off to like do the first pitch for the Marlins or do these charity or community events. He's actually pretty good with that off the field as well. I mean, the legendary, you know, chest bump that he did with Roger Goodell when he got drafted. That you can see that enough. So I think Christian Wilkins is a top 10 athlete here in South Florida, just for the way that he does play, but also the way that he carries himself, and is just a unique personality. I think people love him for that.
He also attends a lot of Panther games too.
Yeah, that's the Dolphins players really they do attend a lot of Panthers games, which is pretty cool to see. So there's him. I have here. So this is 10, 9, and 8, right? So I do have Bam Adebayo. I think, and I wasn't really ready for ranking these from top to bottom, but regardless, I'll put Bam here. He's obviously, from the way the Heat have treated him since he got drafted, since they believe in him, he's still super young when you consider it, and just because the Heat drafted him when he was like 19 years old. So it feels like he's been in the league forever, which in a way he has, but he's still young, and he's shown flashes of, like, people think that he's going to score like 30, 40 points per game, like just that sort of, but he's not that type of guy. He's an all-around player. And a lot of the things that you'll notice from him, you either have to go to advanced metrics to kind of get a gauge as to what he is about, or you really do have to look at the eyeball test and think, well, you got to look at his defense, which people don't, it's not sexy. Defense it's very sexy to people. It's not something that stands out to people, but you have to look at his defense. And there have been games throughout these amazing runs for the Heat in the last 5 seasons. Where he has had games where he's stepped up and he's put up, you know, you can ask 20 points from this guy, but he's put up very important 20 points for the Miami Heat. So I think if Bam is there, he's made all-star teams. He's
2 finals.
Two NBA finals. That there's, I think people are harsh, like treat him a little bit harshly. In that
I
sense,
agree.
because they're expecting him to be, I don't know, prime Dwight Howard. I think that's probably what they're trying to expect from him, but he's not going to be that. But he's definitely one of the top players in the NBA, because you notice that the Heat don't really throw his name around with regards to like any sort of trade, especially the one that's kind of been looming for all the summer and it hasn't
Yeah.
happened yet, but it should happen. And free Dame. So there you go. So that's my number 9, and now my number 8. My number 8. I'm gonna put a Panther here. Because I think the other ones on my list, I have to kind of put them a little bit higher for reasons that they've been super important for their teams. But this guy's incredibly important. I'll put Carter Verhaeghe.
Oh,
so I put Carter Verhaeghe.
Oh, he's not on my list, but
he's not on your list. But I had to put him because it's not just the fact that he's been incredibly consistent since he's come down here to South Florida.
The big moments, right?
And that honestly swayed me, because it's not just about these guys through the regular season. It's also the fact that you have to also show up for the playoffs. And you look at the Panthers haven't had many guys show up for the playoffs in their franchise history. But there is one guy that does show up, and it's Carter Verhaeghe. And he's been known to show up for quite a long time. He got that cup in Tampa, and he brought the same fervor down here to South Florida. So I mean, and he obviously had the massive series winning goal against Boston.
Okay.
So that guy lives for the big games.
Yes, he lives for the clutch, that's for sure. So yeah. And he is one of the honorable mentions. Other honorable mentions that I have are Jazz Chisholm, Sergei Bobrovsky.
Well, I mean, do you want to go through some honorable mentions before we keep going? Because I think we'll have a lot of similar ones.
We'll keep going after this one. But another one, Brooks Koepka, and if he ends up being
okay, you went off the board there with
and Damian Lillard. If that trade does end up going, but we're gonna go 7 through 4 when we come back from this commercial break and get into segment number 2. We are going to discuss 7 through 4 in segment number 2 here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about AG1. And I started taking my AG1 because sometimes I have a little bit too much coffee, and I drink it in the morning before my workout, and it makes me feel great. If a comprehensive solution is what you need for your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's ag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out. Segment number 2 here on this Sunday, July 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where Francisco Oporta and I are discussing our top 10 stars in South Florida. So for me, 7 through 4. I do have a Panther as this next one. I got to go with the captain, Alexander Barkov, the leader of the team, the guy who's been there for a decade, who has been through a lot of hell as far as losing when it comes to this franchise. And even though he can score 40 in any given season, of course, with the injuries is really what's been holding him back. But what he does especially on the defensive end of the ice, 200-foot game, back checks that creates transition. He can score on the power play, all situations, take an important face-off. Sasha Barkov is number 7. Number 6, when healthy, he was an MVP candidate last year, and that's Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback of the Miami Dolphins. I'm going to put him at number 6. Number 5, it's because the reason why, even though he's not having a good year, I have him at number 5, because if you get this guy in the postseason, I think he could really take over a pitching staff, and that's Sandy Alcantara, who's been good the last 2 starts for the Marlins. And number 4, I got Jimmy Butler. Not a guy who will jack up threes, but he can drive to the paint, get important free throws for those for additional points on the board as well, and does it on the defensive end just like Barkov, and is just great as far as a floor general as well for a small forward for Jimmy Butler. So 7 through 4, Francisco, who are your guys?
Okay. All right. So I have so this is number 7, right? Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay. So it's number 7. I have Tua Tagovailoa. I almost put him in the honorable mentions because uh, it just seems like every season he's injured, and that kind of does play into the factors for my criteria. But at the same time, his importance to the Dolphins is, of course, he's the most important player on the team. And when he is healthy, he is starting to show that he can play in the NFL, that he can be a leader of a team that can, if he stays healthy, could possibly win at least 10 games in a season, which should be enough for the Dolphins to crack a wild card spot and then see what happens once they make the playoffs, because that's basically what happens here in South Florida now. Let's just get in and see what happens. And it's just been unfortunate for him that he's had injuries of that obviously he can't control. Things happen. Then obviously last season was very not good with the concussions. So, but Tua belongs in this top 10 list at the very least, just because when he is healthy, he is one of the top athletes, and he's showing it. And I think this season he's bulked up. I think he might have watched The Last Dance. I think he might have watched The Last Dance when Michael Jordan was getting pummeled by the Detroit Pistons, and then he bulked up in order to take a beating, and that changed his game and his longevity for his career at the end. And maybe Tua's trying to take that into account. Maybe if he bulks up, he can withstand the hits a little bit better, and hopefully that doesn't backfire on him in any sort of way. I have that was number 7. Number 6, I have Luis Arias. He's I have him higher because he's the Marlins' best hitter right now. I'm very biased, obviously, with regards to seeing him. I'm a Marlins historian as well. And what he does is incredibly difficult. It doesn't matter how he gets it done. Everybody's been talking about him being a singles merchant, but I think if he was on any other team that was a contender right now, if you put him on the Braves or the Dodgers, or you put him in New York with the Yankees, he would be even more highly touted than he was here in Miami. And
I agree.
It's mainly because of what he's surrounded by. The Marlins have been incredibly inconsistent with scoring runs in the clutch, and Luis Arias seems to always be on base. But the problem with being on base is that he's got nobody driving him in. And so, but it shouldn't take away from the fact that he's been for at least up to half the season, he was flirting with 400.
That's like 370, I believe, right now.
Which was
still pretty good.
Yeah, and he's not going to get to 400. That's unless he completely goes off in these next 2 months to finish out the season. But he has been. That's something that's incredibly rare nowadays in baseball. Everything's about the 3 true outcomes, swinging for the fences, and he's back to a classic style of baseball that we haven't really seen. I keep comparing him. He's the Venezuelan Tony Gwynn. We haven't seen that in a long time, and the Marlins haven't seen that in a long time either. It's been a long time since they've had a player that can consistently get on base.
Doesn't strike out often.
Puts the ball in play, and you see him thinking out there. That's another thing. He's got a high IQ. He's got a high IQ for what he's seeing the defense giving him and what pitchers are giving him. So he'll shoot things through holes and try. He has a plan when he gets there. And it's not that other players don't have plans. Other players do, but he sees the game on a different level. And I hope that he stays in Miami. That's another thing but I hope he stays in Miami and we can keep him. He'd be our version of Tony Gwynn, and he'll be here he's well on pace to get 2,500 hits if he keeps going like this. So this is one of the rare instances of the Marlins winning a trade.
No doubt.
All right, so that was my number 6, and my number 5. Let's see. So I have top 5. I'm going to make sure I've got this here. Actually, number 5, I shall put as what's number 6, right? Yeah. Okay. Number 5 is Sandy Alcantara.
We have the same number for Sandy.
So Sandy, he's been struggling this season. There's a lot of pressure with being the ace of the staff, having won the Cy Young, so he knows that he's the ace of the staff. And there's been changes this season that might have affected him a bit. The pitch clock is new, and the lack of a shift as well in baseball. So there's some rule changes that may have affected the way that he's approached the game. But he's settling in now since the All-Star break. He started to settle in. He started seeing flashes of it, and now he's getting back to throwing 8 pitches or complete games, which is great for the Marlins. But unfortunately, offense doesn't pick him up, or the bullpen doesn't hold the games for him at all. So that's unfortunate for him. But he is one of the top pitchers in baseball, and he finally. The Marlins have an ace. It's been a while since they've had a definitive ace like this. Since Jose Fernandez died, that's really it. And
Sandy's locked up.
Yeah, and he's locked up, and that's kind of why I see there's a bit of a sense of urgency for the Marlins, because they made some trades in this past trade deadline, and I think the Marlins really do need to find a way to win within this window. But I find it very difficult. The division that they're in, the Braves are incredibly good. The Phillies have also shown a knack that they're still defending National League champions, and they have a team that has a few guys locked up, and they spend a lot of money. And the Mets are a joke, which is funny, but they still have a lot of money. They're a joke with a lot of money, and so the Marlins need to find a way. And without Sandy, it's going to be incredibly difficult. But for right now, he's the ace. He's the ace of the staff, but there's another guy that just got called up again that might take that throne from him. But that's my number 5. And okay, we're up to top 4. Wow.
Number 4.
This is different. I'm doing this on the spot right now, so this is it. Okay. People are gonna say this is sacrilegious. I'm gonna put Messi here.
Oh, okay. He's on my list, but higher.
I'm gonna put Messi here. I don't watch soccer. I don't care about soccer. I don't really have a taste or a feel for soccer. I played Mario Strikers on the GameCube and on the Wii, and I didn't buy it for the Switch. And if Mario can't get me to like soccer, then nothing will. I will tell you that. But it's not that. But I'm not going to bash soccer. A lot of people do that. But I'm not going to bash soccer. The beautiful game is hockey. It's not soccer, by the way. But I do understand the impact, and I've seen the highlights on the socials, and the fact that this guy is running around and he looks like he's playing against little kids. So I do see the impact. I do understand the comparison. It's like if you put LeBron James in the Chinese league right now, that's what would be happening. And I understand the impact. I understand how huge it is for South Florida, and I'm also. I almost tweeted this out. I might tweet this out at some point in the future, and I'm still calling it Twitter, by the way. I think that we've been incredibly lucky down here in South Florida to see some great athletes, great all-time athletes come, like either come down here or were drafted here and stayed, or just came up with us. We've seen Ichiro Suzuki. We've seen Dan Marino, obviously. We've seen Roberto Luongo. Just Miguel Cabrera, LeBron
Shaq.
James, Dwayne Wade, Shaq, just all these all-time athletes. And now we have the soccer, the equivalent of the greatest soccer player ever, come down here, even if it's for a short stint. It's probably going to be a very short stint.
Yeah.
But regardless, he's here. And I think it's that is not lost on me at the very least. And just the fervor for it, just driving downtown Miami, and you just see the big giant sign on one of the side of the buildings. It's just him in pink and black, and I do like that color combination for
It's
Inter Miami.
it's definitely made a difference culturally in this city now that Lionel Messi is here, and have him on my list, and we're gonna tell you where I have him here. But we'll go from 3 to 1 and round out this top 10 athletes in South Florida right after this.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Sunday, July 6th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day, talking top 10 athletes in South Florida and their impacts on and off the field or ice. And Francisco, number 3, I have Matthew Tkachuk for
should we do this? Okay, hold on a second. I just want to see in the order. Should we do 3 and 2 and then do honorable mentions and then we reveal our number ones?
Yeah, sure. So 3, Matthew Tkachuk, who super clutch throughout the postseason, 3 out of 4 game winning goals in the Carolina series alone, and just the loud leader that he was after Game 5, saying we'll be back in this locker room. The bus in 10. Just him being on the NBA on TNT in right before a Heat game, I think that Matthew Tkachuk deserves a top 3 mention for athletes in South Florida. Number 2, and I think this is mostly because of the sport he plays. It's a more popular sport, but he has changed this team ever since he got traded here, and probably could even make this team a Super Bowl contender this year. Number 2 is Tyreek Hill, who has the chance to break the receiving yards record this year. Who, with an extra game now, there's a chance for him to break Calvin Johnson's record, and I have Tyreek Hill here on my list at number 2 for the Miami Dolphins. So 3 and 2 for you.
All right, so 3 and 2 for me. At number 3, I have Alexander Barkov. Seeing him since he was drafted, seeing that the way that he's carried himself, the way he's embraced South Florida. He's a Miami Heat season ticket holder, which I find it very difficult that they play the season at the same time. But he finds a way to get to games when he's got those off days down here. So that's always nice and encouraging. I haven't really seen him in a Marlins game. We got to get him to one of those.
No doubt.
But Barkov has probably been the most consistent athlete down here, and a lot of people just don't know it. And that's on the Panthers. Also on the fact that, and on the totem pole, hockey is not as high of a priority. But hopefully, after this past season, people really start paying attention, and the Panthers have a great bounce back. But it'll be a bit difficult. We'll see. We'll see once the season starts and how the new pieces fall, and how the recovery is going for a lot of these guys. But Barkov has just been the pillar for the Panthers, and here in South Florida, he's always in the Selk conversation, the Lady Bing conversations. I know people want him to kind of be like Ovechkin or Stamkos and just have boatloads of goals to go along with it, but he's the best all-around player. And now that Patrice Bergeron is retired,
he's basically there.
He's the guy now. He's that guy. The fact that he's not in a city like Boston or Toronto, people just haven't really noticed. But he'll be one of those that you'll look and they'll retire as number 16, and you'll be like, man, this is one of the greatest athletes that's ever played down here. And he's, early on, it just like he's been healthy, which has been fantastic for this team. And I know people will look at playoff numbers and everything like that, but you look at everybody that's every expert, every all fellow players, teammates, opposing players, when they talk about him, that he's essentially he's a dark horse or a sleeper type of player. He's sneaky good for a lot of people, but those guys, the experts, the people around the hockey world, they know like this is one of the top players in the league. Right? He's one of the most dangerous. He's probably one of the smartest too. Just defensively, and I urge people to look at the way he plays. Don't bog yourself down on whether he scored a goal or not, but just look at the way he plays. All right, his checking game, the way he just robs the puck from people just out of nowhere, just silently pickpockets people all the time. He's got that just
quietly too.
Quietly, and he's the captain of the team, and he leads by example. His actions are what speak louder than his words. A lot of people have criticized him for that as well. And just like, this guy is the most well-respected guy on the Panthers. Every teammate that's ever played with them will tell you that. So I think Alexander Barkov is one of the most important Panthers ever, and is one of the top athletes in South Florida. So that's my number 3. And my number 2 is Matty Tkachuk.
Panthers back-to-back for you.
So yeah, back-to-back. And so I guess people will know what my number 1 is, but Matty Tkachuk in one season, just a massive shift in attitude for the team. The Panthers have been contending for quite a few seasons before he got here, right? They've been building up to it, but there was always this sense that, the Panthers are kind of flashy. We had the 2022 season where they were just scoring boatloads of goals, but people still saw them as kind of like a soft team, as a team you could push around, a team that didn't really have attitude, that had no real
grit,
and really, I mean, you could see it in. I think I urge people also, if you want to see what the Panthers were like, what kind of the microcosm of 2022, and how the regular season was a bit of a facade with regards to the goals and everything that was happening. Look at not the round against the Tampa Bay Lightning where they got swept, the Washington Capitals series. I think that one evoked more of what was wrong with that Panthers team than anything else, because the Washington Capitals turned on a switch, and they had won the cup a few seasons back, and they were pushing the Panthers around like crazy. And everybody here was complaining, nobody's calling these, the Capitals play so dirty, Tom Wilson, like all these other things. But that's hockey. That is old-time hockey. And that's what they do in the playoffs. And the Panthers didn't have a guy that could combat that, in a sense, not with just his words, but backing it up. And Matthew Tkachuk, dear Lord, what an airdrop by Zito to pull off that trade, trading one of the other most important players in franchise history in Jonathan Huberdeau. And I saw some people were there was like a poll debating whether, I don't know if you put it up or somebody else put it up.
I put it up.
You put it up, whether to retire his number. And the fact that a lot of people are saying no obviously offends me as a Panthers historian. Because that man, Jonathan Huberdeau, you can say what you want after one season, but I mean, there haven't been many Panthers that have lasted that long with him. And he's not like Stephen Weiss. Like, Stephen Weiss was here a long time. Respect to him and everything like that. But Jonathan Huberdeau was just so much better than him. And without Huberdeau, you wouldn't have gotten the great play out of Barkov. I mean, that was the 1-2 punch right there. The core three, right? Ekblad, Barkov, and Huberdeau. It was those three guys, right? Sound like tails and knuckles. And that was the fact that people disrespect Huberdeau over that. But trading one of the most important franchise players ever for Matthew Tkachuk, and then locking him up, and basically like, all right, Barkov is the captain, but this is Matthew Tkachuk's team.
Mm-hmm. He's changed the direction of it.
One season, the regular season, everybody was complaining, everything like that, but Tkachuk's play was incredibly consistent, scored 40 goals, and then the playoffs happened, and I think had it been a different roster without Tkachuk against Boston, they would have gotten swept.
I agree.
They would have gotten swept because that attitude wouldn't have been there. Mm-hmm. Tkachuk is like, he's got that dog in him.
No doubt.
He really has that dog in him. Doesn't matter. Like the Boston Bruins, a big, giant bear, right? But you got that dog in him, and he's just keeps barking at the bear like he's going to take down the bear. And they did. They did. And then the Toronto series and the clutch goals after that, and just the attitude and the fact that he just gets under everybody's skin. He is the number 2 athlete for me at this point. He really is. You haven't seen that from anybody on the Dolphins or the Marlins right now. You haven't really seen it, but the Panthers haven't seen it in a long time. We're just a guy that's completely changes the culture of a team. So that's Matty Tkachuk. That's my number 2.
Yeah, and I had him at 3, and then you had Barkov at you had him at 3 while I had Barkov at 7. I already named my honorable mentions earlier in the segment, number 1.
I've got 3.
So I'm gonna start with my number 1, and then I'll have you do your honorable mentions and then your number 1. But number 1, it has to be Lionel Messi, not only because of averaging over a goal a game.
Been here like so 3 weeks.
in a few weeks. Like he's just on a different level. He's just a man playing amongst boys. I know Inter Miami's last in the table, but what he's done even in the League Cups games too, he's just and the cultural impact of being a World Cup winner as well, the marketability, the draw, the Instagram follows that have gone up with Inter Miami. It's got to be Lionel Messi at number 1 for me. And you?
All right. Well, I'm not just following the trends here, right? But it's Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was the prototype for just a shift change. It really wasn't a shift change. The Miami Heat have always been this.
Passing the torch from Wade to Butler.
Well, obviously, Dwayne Wade is still one of probably the most important athlete in South Florida sports history. I'm going to tell you that much. It doesn't matter how long Messi's here, which isn't going to be very long, but that impact that he has and still has in the league. But Jimmy Butler, the ultimate. If you had to list all 120 something plus teams in professional sports of a team that matches the player, their top player. I mean, the Miami Heat might be number 1 with the way Jimmy Butler is a Miami Heat.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost unbelievable when you see him like, oh, he played for the Bulls, he played for the Timberwolves, played for the Sixers.
And he wanted out of those?
Does not match. But Jimmy Butler on the Heat, oh yeah, now that makes a lot of sense. Just the attitude, the way that there doesn't seem to be any sense of worry at all when you see him play. The regular season happens. All right, the Heat. All right, we'll make the playoffs. We could be number 1 in the East. We could be the final team in the play-in tournament in the East, and we'll find a way. We'll figure it out.
Even when everyone doubts him.
And he shows up. He expels his energy when the team needs him the most, and the fact that you saw that for these past few seasons, and he's backed up everything that he said. They lost in 2022 in Game 7 on the final shot against Boston. in the Eastern Conference Finals, and he was sitting there like, "All right, we got enough here. We'll bring everybody back, and we'll get it done next time." And they did it. They did it, and I honestly, you look at the guys that are playing right now. I mean, yeah, we're Messi and all this stuff, but really, the thing for Inter Miami, it's I can't. This is a flash in the pan type of thing for me right now. It really is. It really is. It's more. Messi's not just. It's not really to build up Miami's team. It's to build up the entire league of MLS.
Yes,
that's why. So when I think top South Florida athletes, I'm talking about the guys that are here to lift up here, and that's their mission. Messi's mission isn't to lift up the Miami team; it's to lift up the entire league. Whereas Jimmy Butler was to lift up the Miami Heat, and when the Heat are good, South Florida is good, and it causes all the other teams to step up. Because I think David Sampson, as much as a lot of people hate him, the fact that he said like, man, they hated the Heat because of how good they were. That tells you how the Heat impact the other teams down here and should force them to be good, to force them to try and get eyeballs to them, get fans in the seats. The Heat being good only helps the Dolphins and the Panthers and the Marlins, because you can't just sit down and just be terrible. You need to do something about it. And Jimmy Butler did that for the Heat. They got them out of a very weird period of that transition between the big three and now. It was a very weird mediocre Hassan Whiteside, and spending all that money on Tyler Johnson, just
Justice Winslow.
Yeah, and Jimmy Butler's just fantastic. I mean, I forgot to talk about my honorable mentions, but I just lift them off real quick. Jazz Chisholm Jr., because when he's healthy, he can be very good, but he hasn't been healthy, and we can't see consistency from him. We've shown flashes.
Yesterday, even he got hurt.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen flashes of him being really good, but the Marlins need an actual impact bat like that can drive in runs, and if he's good, then sure. Sergei Bobrovsky is my other one, because for right now, at the very least, he is the number one goaltender for the Florida Panthers, and goalie is the most important position in hockey. And when he was on, you saw in the playoffs, he is fantastic and the most important player. And alternate history or other universe out there, the Panthers find a way to pull it off against the Vegas Golden Knights, and Bob, either him or Kachuk win the Conn Smythe. So there you go. And then I have Tyreek Hill. Just the fact that he's lifted up the play of Tua Tagovailoa makes him look good. His off the field stuff obviously kind of impacts the way I feel about him, because it doesn't seem like a really good dude.
Yeah. Two different occasions now.
Hide your kids, hide your wife. But there you go. And that's it.
Yep. And that rounds out our top 10 athletes for South Florida, current South Florida athletes. And if you guys on the YouTube want to comment on yours, or even tweet us on Twitter about your top athletes in the South Florida landscape, make sure to do it at MondoMan12, at FJOJR for Francisco, to tweet at us. Let's have a little bit of fun in this off season now. But Francisco, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can find your work.
All right. So right now it's Marlins season, and but they're still going. But at Marlins history, that's where I'm focusing on and everything right now at this point. But I will transition come October, and at FLA Cats history for your Florida Panthers stuff. That's kind of the duology that I'm working with right now. Once October hits, I'm Panthers historian, unless the Marlins make the playoffs by some miracle. And there you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, my friend, and I'll see you next time.
Alrighty.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Francisco Oporta, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.